Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam Today. WURDRadio.com, 96.1 FM, 900 AM, and on Facebook at Forward, that's FORURD, and Twitter at Onward, ONWURD, and Instagram at Onward, and Tumblr at Onward. And we want to welcome you again with the standard and traditional greetings to our listening audience of peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. And we began with saying that we praise Allah, therefore all the praise belongs to God. We seek His help, we seek His forgiveness, and we seek refuge with Almighty God Allah from those things or those evil deeds or whisperings that come or emanate from within our very own selves. And whomever Allah guides, no man can misguide, and whomever Allah permits to go astray, no man can guide. And then we concluded with what is the Kalima Shahadatain, or the two-part statement that every Muslim makes, and that is, I give open testimony that there is nothing, no deity worthy of worship except Almighty God, Allah. He is alone. He has no associates or partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, unto whom the Quran was revealed over 1400 years ago on what is now called the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, is his slave servant and final messenger. Again, welcome to Islam Today. Today is the 16th of Jamada al-Awwal, 1441 Hijri. That is the Muslim calendar, and it's January the 11th, 2020 on the Gregorian or the Christian calendar. And it is a balmy 67 degrees, Dave. Man, talk about global warming. I think it hit 70 today in Philadelphia. If you're listening outside of the listening area, well, alhamdulillah, 67 degrees January is almost unheard of. But that just goes to show the trend of global warming is undeniable. It is a fact. It is here. Whole nother show, though. Today we have a scholar with us today, and we really want to kind of lay the groundwork with him. He is a scholar, a global speaker, a media contributor, and a public intellectual based at the Department of Sociology at Rice University. He is the author of many books and articles. He has appeared in New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC, CBS, Fox, and MSNBC. Newsweek has covered him and on foreign policy. He has been invited to speak at some of the leading international organizations and universities in the world. I'm talking about Dr. Craig Considine. He is visible on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as YouTube. He holds a PhD from Trinity College, University of Dublin, an MSc from Royal Holloway, University of London, and a BA from American University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Considine is a U.S. Catholic of Irish and Italian descent. Now, dig this. He's also an incredibly published author. He's authored The Dialogue of Civilizations, Muhammad's Interactions with Christians, which is in progress. The Prophet of Love, a Catholic's Note on Prophet Muhammad, which was published this year. Islam in America, Exploring the Issues, 2019. Muslims in America, Examining the Facts. And Muhammad Nabi, which was published in Indonesia in that language in 2018. And Islam, Race, and Pluralism in the Pakistani Diaspora. Wow. I mean, this is incredible. And I would like to welcome my guest, Dr. Craig Considine. How are you? Peace be upon you.
Peace be with you, Qasim. I'm doing well, thank God.
Okay, wow. It's been a while, right? We've been trying to put this show together for some time. I've been following you on Twitter and in social media. You're very active there, and you're really putting some ideas out into the social media atmosphere, if you will, that is generating a lot of talk, but also that is helping to coalesce the Christian-Islamic dialogue. So for the interview, please tell us how you want to be addressed, just so we can, you, Dr. Constantine, Craig, or...
Craig. Honestly, Qasim, Craig is fine.
Okay, whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Craig is fine.
Because I know you've worked quite hard for the PhD, and we want to just give you all your due respect and acumen. So,
appreciate that.
Can we begin this with you telling the audience about your upbringing, childhood, your education, and how all these played a role in where you are today as it relates to your discourse on Islam and Muslims?
Sure. So, you all are based in Philly. I'm not too far away, at least where I grew up. I grew up in Boston.
Okay.
Suburb called Needham. And, grew up in the Catholic Church. My dad, as you mentioned, he is of Irish descent. My mother's Italian descent. So, pretty traditional family. Not too overtly Catholic, to be honest with you. Like a lot of people are saying I'm some devout Catholic as if I grew up like a priest. It wasn't really that. Like a lot of Americans, it was pretty much a secular household. But, I was brought up in the church. I went to Catholic school. I did all that. And I think in the context of our discussion, like this thing, my journey really started in hindsight on 9/11. Needham, the town I grew up in, predominantly white, predominantly Christian, either Catholic or Protestant. And when 9/11 went off, I really had no context for understanding any of the stuff that was being thrown at me in the media. All this stuff like, Islam hates us, and, Saddam Hussein and bin Laden and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Like, I had no frame of reference. There were no Muslims in the high school that I went to. There were no Muslims, to my knowledge, in my town itself. I didn't know anything about the faith. I didn't know anything about the lives of Muslims. The closest masjid was in Roxbury, which is like 8 miles from my house. So I had absolutely no context. And I think for a few years there, I was 15 when it happened. For a few years, I kind of fell into, I wouldn't call it like the Islamophobia trap, but it was a situation where I was thinking certain things about, over 1 billion people in the world and their faith, which weren't, now that I look back at it, accurate. So I go to college, and I actually went to college to play basketball. A lot of people can't believe that. But I did that, and then I started studying for the first time in my life, really, because I had to get grades to stay on the basketball team. And I found a passion for knowledge. And at the time, this was in 2003, 2004, Iraq War was popping off. Afghanistan was in its third year. And I decided I wanted to pursue international relations and politics. So I ended up going to American University in D.C., obviously the political hub of our country. And I was taking Arabic classes, and I was taking all these Middle East politics classes and like Islam 101 with the hope of understanding like why these people hated us. Like, why did this thing happen? Because a lot of the stuff we were hearing was, the Islamic faith is like fundamentally incompatible with Western values and stuff like that. So that was the frame of reference that I went into my undergraduate degree, and then it all changed when I was a sophomore, enrolled in a class called The World of Islam. It's like Islam 101. And my professor, Akbar Ahmed, the first thing he told us, Qasim, he shared a bunch of hadiths, but the one that stood out to me the most, and a lot of scholars say it's a weak hadith, but anyways, for the purpose of this point, the hadith was, "The ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr." Mm-hmm. And that quote right there, literally, it just shook my world. Like, it physically. It's
a famous quote.
Yeah, it's a famous quote, exactly. And like that one quote right there, it was almost like I was like a balloon, and the professor took a needle and like popped the balloon and like popped me. It was like a bubble bursting, and I was like, oh wow, I have no idea what I'm talking about when I think about things like the Islamic faith and Muhammad and Muslims worldwide. So from there, I recognized that the brain, our minds, are very, very fragile. And it's very easy for the human brain, for lack of a better term, to be brainwashed, to be brought into a certain direction if it's fed certain information. So my work today, with Islam, a lot of people are like, how did you get here? And in short, that's how I got here. But it's also like, it could have been, I feel like it was kind of random that it happened to be Islam being like the trigger that brought me into this journey of knowledge. But it really, that's what it was. The Islamic faith has helped me think better. It has helped me use my mind in a more constructive way. And I think more than that, it's livened the heart and it's livened the soul, and that's where it's really at.
Well, you've kind of answered my second question as to you seem to be a leading advocate for Christian-Islamic dialogue in academia. But how do you, or have you chosen this cause, and why did you choose this cause, and what would be your end goal? What do you propose to achieve by stimulating this dialogue in academia?
It's a good question. I think the first part of your question, it kind of goes both ways. Like I do believe that God brings us, each and every human being, on the journey that he wants us to go on. And the timing of 9/11, me kind of miraculously being in a class with an awesome teacher, all of those things are kind of out of my control. But at the same time, when I started studying and I really got into the nitty-gritty of the scholarship, but also what was happening around me, I made the conscious decision that this is something that, for whatever reason, it inspired me. It touched my heart and it touched my soul. And the third element of this is like when I'm sharing my views and I'm sharing my perspectives with people, I see that other people find value in it. So it's the combination of it being random. The second part, like me deliberately participating in this, what's called a movement, because I believe in it, but also I feel like it's needed. There's been so many polls, like, over the years, kind of countless polls just showing us that relations between Christians and Muslims, especially in the United States, are not good.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't control that, but I do know that my perspective perhaps can bring down this temperature, which seems to be, at a boiling point between Christians and Muslims.
I'm interested in how you couch to phrase it as a movement, because you seem to be, at least to me, to be such a rare bird. Who all are some of your contemporaries that are in this movement, and how would you couch yourself as, say, the progenitor of the movement, the father of the movement, the founder of the movement, or just a member within that movement?
Definitely a member within the movement, and I think the movement, if I were to describe it, it's one of, I think fundamentally it's rooted in knowledge. It's rooted in it's rooted in intellect. I think that's very important. But I also think this is a movement of encounter. It's a movement of human interaction. Like Pope Francis calls it the culture of encounter. And what he means by that is, you can read all the books you want, you can engage in various programs and degrees that you want, but you're really never going to truly learn unless you see it for yourself. And in that sense, maybe I am kind of on the forefront of the movement, because like I go out there, I don't just sit behind a computer screen and tweet and read books and write. Like I've been going out there. I've been to hundreds of mosques. I've been to hundreds of churches, sharing my views. So sure, like maybe I'm a member of the movement.
Well, it seems to me that you're the progenitor of the movement, but I know your humility probably will not permit you to say anything greater. But let me ask you this question: how extensive has your scholarship, and because you seem to pick out the right verses in the Quran and Hadith, how extensive has your studies in Quran and Hadith in the Arabic language been?
So with Arabic, I took it for 3 years in my undergraduate degree. Unfortunately, I'd never had the privilege of studying in a nation or a country that uses Arabic as its predominant language.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of my scholarship and my engagement with Arabic, like if you look at my books, I'm always using Arabic terminology pertaining to the Islamic faith. So I'm still kind of immersed in it. In terms of the Quran and Hadith, this is interesting. Like, none of my degrees are actually in Islamic studies. My degrees are actually in international relations and politics and sociology. So I look at the Quran and the Hadith not from necessarily a theological angle, not even necessarily from a religious angle. I look at it from a sociological angle. And some of the teachers that I've had the privilege of working with, you know, they've kind of taught me that if we focus so much on these texts, there's a tendency for us to get into this like tit for tat game, where it's like this, you know, this verse said this, but then this verse contradicts this, or my holy book says this, and this holy book says that. You know, it's kind of a messy game. It's kind of a dead end in terms of having constructive dialogue. So I was taught that look at the Quran and the Hadith in an essentialist way, meaning that they have an overarching spirit. And this spirit is one, at least in the Islamic tradition, you know, of mercy, of compassion, of justice and peace. And that's what I bring into the text when I'm actually engaging with them. These are the things that I bring into it.
Great segue to my next question. Does Christianity have more in common with Islam than the things that seem to be superficially dividing us?
I mean, absolutely.
Well, of course, I would like you to elaborate on it a little bit.
Yes, of course. I mean, let me say this first. Like, one thing that I'm not going to shy away from are the differences, right? There are some theological differences that Christians and Muslims may kind of get into a conversation with. Unfortunately, they sometimes aren't constructive, but like the differences do exist. But like fundamentally, first and foremost, we believe in God. We believe in monotheism. We don't believe in paganism. We don't believe in idol worship. These are all kind of fundamental elements of our shared Abrahamic tradition. We believe in the prophets. We believe in the Old Testament. We believe in justice. We believe in the golden rule, which is super important in today's day and age. We believe in humanity. So the value system, let me call it that, the value system is there. Now, if we want to find differences theologically, we can do that as well. But I always tell people, like, you know, why do people want to kind of put up a barrier, saying like, you know, well, that's who you are and this is who I am. And they want to put up a wall. And I always find it very interesting. Like, why do people focus on the differences instead of the similarities? Like, why can't, you know, and I believe there's a verse in the Quran that says, you know, to me, my religion, and to you, yours. And I think that's how it should be. We can still find ways of working together. We can find the commonalities, and we don't have to necessarily go down a black hole of theological debate.
So you use Twitter as a vehicle to inform Christians about the life of Muhammad, peace be upon him, fairly consistently. You've shown him as a legitimate preacher, a man of God, and a prophet. So within your Christian teachings, how do you personally reconcile that view, and how do you explain it to your fellow Christians?
Well, the second part of that is something that, you know, I do have to grapple with. A lot of prominent Christian figures, bishops, so on and so forth, who I genuinely admire, have come out kind of publicly, at least on social media, saying that I engage in heresy because, you know, heretical views, because I actually believe in Muhammad as a prophet. But I love, going back to the first part of your question, I love looking at not necessarily what Jesus and Muhammad were saying, but rather what they were doing. And for me, one of the reasons why Jesus has always inspired me, you know, from the time I was a boy, is because of his actions, you know, reaching out to the people on the periphery of society that no one else wants to deal with or interact with, and then bringing them into the fold of human interaction in society. When I started studying the life of Muhammad, peace be with him, I saw the same thing. And it was quite remarkable. You know, he being an orphan, Jesus being essentially a refugee dealing with tough times, Muhammad was the same. So again, like, that's what I focus on. I think action is what will lead to a more productive and prosperous and healthy future, not only for Christians and Muslims individually as communities, but also in a communal way, that working on good deeds, especially together, can bring us into a more, positive realm. I mean, to me, that's what it means to be a Christian. Creating the kingdom of heaven, if we want to call it that, not waiting for the kingdom of heaven until we pass away, but creating that kingdom of heaven here on earth. And you can't create that kingdom without Muslims.
So what would you do if you were excommunicated for your beliefs and your teachings?
Well, thankfully, being a Catholic, I think I'm in pretty good hands with Pope Francis at the moment. I think he and I, in many ways, are kindred spirits. I look up to him. I think he's not perfect, but he's doing an exceptional job. Mm-hmm. If the church excommunicated me, that's interesting. It wouldn't stop me at all from my engagement in these various endeavors. If you know who Hans Kung is, he's a philosopher and a theologian from Switzerland. He's a lot older than I am. He's probably in his 80s now, but he also considers Prophet Muhammad to be a prophet, and he is an ordained Catholic, priest, but the Catholic Church will not recognize him and allow him to teach under their rule.
Because of that position?
I mean, a lot of different positions, but he is very, very progressive, and he was progressive before progressive was even kind of a buzz term. Mm-hmm. But he's carried on, and I'm not going to let an institution dictate how I feel, what I think, and how I act. And I mean that in a negative sense. Like if they're saying, well, you're not a Catholic, I'm going to say, okay, that's fine. Just because you're an institution and you're the Catholic Church does not mean that you kind of have a control over me. So I'm gonna carry on regardless. So
when the I guess when your contemporaries or your fellow Christians ask you, in what way or how is Jesus and Muhammad, how are they alike?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's the golden rule. Treat others how you wish to be treated. Mm-hmm. And I think both of these individuals, even if we forget about their societal actions in terms of, helping the poor and someone like Muhammad, his anti-racist endeavors, trying to bring racial equality to society. I mean, we have all those kind of macro level things, but I think at a very, very basic level, even in how they interacted and they had conversations with people, just being nice, being light, treating people with goodness, being forgiving, being merciful, being compassionate. It's very, very simple. It's how we live our everyday life. It's how we treat people. That is the true reflection of faith. And, I mean, how many instances can we find in the Quran, the Hadith, linked up to the New Testament, the Gospel, so on and so forth? I mean, these two individuals are clearly preaching the same societal message. But then, again, if we extend it further, they're also saying that we are all children of God as well, and that, he is the ultimate rule over us, and he will judge us. He will judge us on the day of judgment based on the deeds or the lack of deeds that we performed here on earth. As Muhammad Ali said, charity and service to humanity is the rent that we pay to live here on earth. And I think Jesus and Prophet Muhammad would agree with Muhammad Ali.
Yes. So, I mean, the studies are showing the trend of hostility towards Islam or Islamophobia is on the uptick. Do you feel as though your presence in the Twitter world is making a difference? I don't I get your tweets and I see all of your affirmations, but I don't look at the responses because I don't know if I could take it.
Yeah. Well, I hear you. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think that's a good question. It's tough to measure. Mm-hmm. But I will say this: there are a lot of Muslims who reach out to me, especially younger Muslims, mm-hmm. who are like, "You are providing a context that I never really thought of.
Right.
That makes complete sense in the environment and in the country that I'm living." So for me, to hear, just to reach an individual like that is really, really, it's heartwarming, because I'm helping someone that may be navigating a certain challenge or a difficulty.
Well, and you're a teacher at Rice University?
Yeah.
And what course do you teach? I saw it on your...
I teach Muslims in American society, and then I teach a race and ethnic relations class, and then a class called social problems.
Okay.
So the Muslims class is like the big one.
That's the one. You have a lot of students in that class?
I do, yeah.
What's the mix? I'm very curious.
It's, it varies every semester, but like, what's awesome to me is I think sometimes like Muslim students will take the class and be like, I'm gonna ace this. Like, it's Muslims in America. Like, I know what the deal is. And then
or they're coming in there to challenge your Islamic knowledge, your prowess.
Right. Yeah, they do that as well. And then, oftentimes by the end of the course, I'll get an email and they'll be like, in short, they'll be like, wow, like I didn't know of any of this. I never thought of it this way. Which is cool, like especially digging into the history. Like, I begin most of the classes by starting the history of Islam in America, not only in like 1492 with like Columbus and the whole transatlantic slave trade. I go back to Muslim Spain, to like La Convivencia, and to Muslim geographers who basically were so scientifically developed that they allowed Christopher Columbus to even sail the ocean. Like, he wouldn't have been able to do any of that without the extraordinary work of Muslim scientists. So I start way back, and a lot of these students just didn't know any of that. And then, of course, I give them theories. I give them concepts that help them understand what's happening and what they're seeing in the news. I think that's big. And then, Rice is a diverse place, so I get people of all different backgrounds. Most of them come into the class without knowing much of anything about Muslims in America, to be honest.
Yeah,
I bring in guest speakers, Qasim. Like, that's a huge thing that I do. I bring in like 8 guest speakers a semester.
Okay.
People from not simply Muslims either, just people like within this movement that we're kind of talking about. And I make sure to invite a group of people that is representative of the U.S. Muslim population. And as you know, this is one of the most diverse Muslim populations in any country in the world.
Right,
so
it is.
When students see, like, a white woman convert hijabi, or they see, like, a white Turkish-speaking Muslim from, like, the Balkans, they're just like, wait a minute. Like,
right.
What? And then I don't know if you know, Qasim, Islam in Spanish. They're based here in Houston. It's a organization that comprises predominantly of first, second, third generation Latinos. Yes,
I'm familiar with them.
Yeah. So, they come to my class every semester, and again, the students just don't know about these things. They don't realize how rich the Muslim population is here in this country. So it's beautiful to see them
And there's also a growing Native American Muslim population,
which is fascinating as well. I think if I can ever find a way to, experience that and to spend time with
we'll see what we can do to help you out.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I mean that would be a real blessing for sure, because
you recently
the Native American situation is very important.
You recently visited the Grand Mosque of Abu Dhabi as a guest of the government. You were given a private tour of the mosque. What did you learn from your visit and your tour about that particular Muslim prayer space?
So this is really interesting, Qasim, everything that's happening politically with the UAE and Yemen, there is a lot of let's call it baggage going on. And there's a lot of misrepresentation of the UAE government. And what I learned by going to this masjid, there's 2 main things. The first is that it's not simply performing the duties of a typical masjid. They have designed this building, and they're running this building as a cultural center, as a testimony to the beauty of human civilization. So they're just bringing loads and loads of different people in, and they're having different cultural events to celebrate humanity. through the prism of the Islamic tradition in many ways, and the Abrahamic tradition, which I think is beautiful. And in the private tour, and you don't hear about that in the media, by the way, with the private tour, I mean, that was just kind of mind-blowing, learning about the architecture of all the various domes and all the various rooms, and how they're representative of various times in history in which, you know, Muslim empires and civilizations were thriving and building these beautiful buildings, you know, beautiful masjids in honor of God. So it was really cool to see that. And then they also were explaining like how this masjid was built, and all of the different engineers. A lot of them weren't even Muslim, but also a lot of the resources that went into the building, like even like some of the columns were from Italy, like all the materials to build the columns. So you have all of these different elements of the masjid, which are from different parts of the world. So it's kind of like a microcosm of global civilization, not just Islamic civilization, global civilization, and it's in honor of our humanity, which I love.
Wow, I saw some of the footage, and I've seen the masjid on Google. It's huge. Yeah. Do you know how many square feet are in that facility?
You know, they told me
thousands, huh?
Yeah, I forget. I will say this though, like the main prayer room is the biggest rug in the world.
Okay.
You know that. When they said that, I was just like, okay, so this is the biggest rug in the world. That's crazy.
So what are some of the, so you're planning to visit Palestine during the month of Ramadan this year.
Yes. I hope. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got, what do you hope will come from this particular trip? And B, tell us a little bit about some of the other mosques around the world that you visited.
Sure. Well, let me say this. With everything happening right now in the area, like, you know, we're talking about whether now is the best time to go. I know the State Department, like, issued a travel advisory, which is unfortunate for the West Bank, Gaza, and the rest of Palestine, which is unfortunate. So, I mean, God willing, everything will work out and I'll go. But one of my aims, well, a couple aims, but I think first and foremost, I've never been there. And the Palestinian people and the Palestinian culture that I've had the privilege of engaging with here in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world has been amazing, like some of the best in the world. So I'm really looking forward to learning from the Palestinian people in Palestine. I think that's really important to actually meet the people who are there. And then I also am very keen on learning from the Palestinian people in the West Bank on how Christians and Muslims work together to fight or to combat against like let's call it like a oppression. A common oppression, a common force, a common enemy, for lack of a better term.
Because they're all in it together.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so like I mean, they're essentially both populations are. And
are you familiar with? There's a group of Black Palestinians as well.
No, but that sounds quite
something you may look into. I know scholar Mark Lamont Hill,
yes, I know.
who was recently, engaged in a controversial about some statements he made. But what originally took Mark to Palestine was he was studying the Black Palestinian community. And then he kind of got, a view of the entire Palestinian situation. But that's what originally took him to Palestine.
Yeah, so that adds a completely different layer. You're bringing in...
Yeah, ask your tour guides to take you to the hood.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. Yeah, I mean, see, that fact right there, the fact that this population is there, is just so important because, like, especially with the U.S. media, like, there's a tendency to treat the Palestinian people as this big clump,
right?
Big monster, as if they're all like.
And they even ignore, like you say, they ignore the Christian Palestinians, which, by the way, they call, what do they call God in Arabic in the Christian faith?
Say that again. Sorry.
What do they call God in Arabic?
Allah. Yeah, Allah. Yeah.
I got into this big debate. Are you familiar with? There was a group in the '90s who were promulgating some type of narrative that Allah in history was Arab history was a moon goddess, and it was the most far-fetched thing I've ever heard, because the word simply means the God. And it predates Muhammad, peace be upon him. That the idea, the concept of God being God had always been in the world, not just in Arab culture, but throughout the world. Are you familiar with this group that came about in the 90s?
I mean, I might. I feel like I've seen them at like big conventions, like kind of outside a convention with like poster boards and sharing these ideas. But like, I can't say I've studied them.
It's weird. It's whacked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those like periphery movements that no one really knows about. Yeah, I can see that.
So going back to your faith, the Catholic faith, in Catholic Mass, because I've been to Mass, it begins with actually when the priest comes out, he says, "Peace be upon you," and so does the Jummah service begins in Islam with "Peace be upon you," followed in the Catholic tradition by a hymn, and by the adhan in the Islamic tradition. Have you given this any thought or reflection?
Yes, I have. And, you know, what's beautiful as well with a Catholic Mass, before I kind of dig into this, with a Catholic Mass, like after, actually before we receive communion, you know, before we receive the body and blood of Christ, we have to turn to the people sitting next to us and say, and shake their hand and say, "Peace be with you."
Right.
Now, this brings me to my larger point. You know, I think there's a tendency of people, not just Christians and Muslims, but people in general, to think about peace merely as the absence of violence. But peace is a lot more than that. And I think fundamentally the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, Jesus and Muhammad are encouraging us to think about this notion of peace quite differently. And it brings me back to what I was saying with why I admire both of these prophets, because on their everyday interactions, dealing with people, shaking their hands, looking at each other in the eyes, being comforting, being compassionate, being forgiving and merciful, that's what peace is. Peace does not start with treaties between governments. Peace starts, one, within ourselves, first and foremost, and then it starts with the people who are immediately around us. So in the Catholic Mass, we start off our holy tradition with this aura of peace. Relax, be calm, you're in a sacred space, forget your worries. And then at the end of Mass, we have to turn to our neighbor and shake their hand and give them good tidings and smile. I mean, that's what Muhammad was doing too.
Right.
So many examples, not only in the Quran, but also the Hadith. That's how we should be behaving as humans, of people of conscience, of people who are members of communities. That's what peace is. It's not just bombs not going off. That's not what it is. Peace starts, it's a feeling within ourselves.
Okay.
Easygoing and relaxing. So
you use the catchphrase bomb. Let's go there. On to the Iranian conflict.
Yes.
What things can people of the book and Muslims do to best inform and instruct the communities about the catastrophes of war and why this is an unjust war?
Well, I think first and foremost, people of faith, especially Christians and Muslims, need to have, especially in this country, the United States, we need to be very frank and tell each other and agree with one another that this is not an issue rooted in religion. This is a political war. This is about power, it's about resources, and it's about politicians trying to hold on to power within their countries, or whether they're trying to distract us from their own misfortune. So we need to be clear that this is not about the clash of civilizations. This is not about the incompatibility between American values and Islamic values, or U.S. values and Iranian values. This is about politics. And I think that's really, really important. The minute you realize that, then you can start digging back into history. Well, how did we get here? You know, going back to the CIA coup of Iran, up to the Iranian Revolution, like all of these things are more political than they are religious. Not saying that religion doesn't have anything to do with it. It certainly informs the politics. But we're at a huge level of big power politics. And Christians and Muslims need to be very, very clear with that. And we also need to, together, take a stand and kind of denounce some of the corrupt leaders that we have.
On both sides of the world aisle.
Exactly. You know, like one thing, Qasim, that I think especially the left, like the progressive wing of the Twitter world and social media in the U.S. in general, like they kind of were just like, oh, here's like the big bad U.S. again, which I'm not going to disagree with. But it's also like, it's not like the people on the other side are a bunch of angels either. You know, like, I think there's blame to be tossed around in both ways. But again, that goes back to my point. It's a political issue. It's not like one side has it right and the other side needs to be shamed into oblivion. That's not what this is. It's a political issue. These are people fighting to retain power. And perhaps we can find ways in which our own faith traditions can inform this political situation where we can actually work together and see eye to eye to alleviate some of the troubles that are coming out of this. And I don't think it's over either. I think it's simmering, and I think hopefully it calms down. I think
you've
part to your question there. I forget.
No, there was only you've answered. Was it that this is a catastrophe waiting to happen, and that it's an unjust war? But you kind of, I don't know. Let me ask you my next question, and maybe you may have answered that too. But I've seen you've been a correspondent on CNN, BBC, Fox, etc. Yet you don't seem to be as prominent of one of the talking heads as we constantly see on these networks. Do you feel that maybe due to your views that Islam and Christianity can coexist is why you aren't a main staple, I would think, on some of the more progressive networks like CNN and MSNBC?
That's a good question. In terms of the progressive networks, yeah, that's a bit puzzling in a way. But I'll say that
because they're limited in their actual progressive.
Yeah, like you kind of have to, especially with CNN, like you kind of have to toe the line.
Yes,
like there are certain things that you can't really,
like Mark Lamont Hill's position.
Yeah, I mean that's actually exactly what I was thinking about, and issues that he was standing for in related matters. But I'll say this, and I say this to my students all the time in all my classes, like. The number one rule of the media is that if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. And violence and war and fear-mongering are what gives a lot of these media networks ratings. It gives them narrative. And my message is like kind of the exact opposite of what this is. Like, I'm someone who is advocating for peace. And
right.
Peace is almost like a cliche word now. Like you say, you tell someone...
And peace is not profitable.
Peace is not... Exactly. There's the line. Peace is not profitable. Like, people joke at it. They're like, oh, peace. Ha, ha, ha. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, this guy's on CNN talking about peace. Like, they're probably like, yeah, go hug a tree.
Right.
And, like, they probably think that. And, if you bring people onto CNN and Fox and all of these major media networks that actually have ideas and solutions, then that's almost like a threat to a lot of people.
Yeah, I was surprised you were on Fox. What, you were on there, like 2 minutes?
Well, that was more, that actually had to do with some of the articles that I've written, and like they've reposted it. So when I say that my opinions have appeared in Fox, that's what that means.
Okay.
The only, with MSNBC, they invited me on, the Chris Hayes show invited me on, but that was about the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which was an accident. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm happy that they invited me on because I was able to talk about some important things. But when ISIS was going off, or when a mosque in this country is burned down by a Christian supremacist, I oftentimes see straight up Islamophobes on these media networks. I'm like, what are these people doing? They just have a really controversial opinion, and I don't know why they overlook me. But to be honest, Qasim, what can I do?
How big is your hate club? I like I said, I don't follow the negative tweets that you get in response. I mean, are you being bombarded. Like the person that I like the story you tell that you said, a Christian asked you, how could you possibly admire the Prophet Muhammad? Tell us what you said to him.
Well, it goes back to kind of one of the fundamental messages of this conversation we're having. He's, in my opinion, and in the scholarship that I've engaged in, that scholarship has showed me that first and foremost, Prophet Muhammad stood for humanity, and we know that he also had a special place in the Ummah, in his nation, for Christians. So for me, that is admirable. And then you can dig deeper about, one of my favorite stories is when the funeral procession was passing by Muhammad and some of his companions, and they're on the side of the road, and Muhammad stands up, and his companions are saying, "What are you doing? This is a Jewish man that has passed away." And Muhammad comes back and says, "Is he not a human soul?" I mean, how can a Christian, in good faith, as someone who says that they follow Jesus, not appreciate that? That kind of just boggles my mind. Like, people just don't want to let that sink in.
Is it because they're by and large ignorant about the seerah or the history of Muhammad?
No. I think.
Even when you tell them that story, they say, "So what?"
Well, yeah, they do, and then they'll fire back with some ridiculous claim about Muhammad's life. But I think it's deeper than ignorance. I think it's apathy. I think people don't want to change. Like, they don't want their faith to be rocked a little bit, and like, to bring this conversation full circle, like, that's what happened to me when I stepped into that class in 2004. Like, I guess my mind was open enough, and I was like, okay, like, I'm here to learn. And I let that knowledge in, and I let that information in. And I don't know why I was like that, but I'm thankful that it happened. But a lot of people aren't. And they want to keep their guard up, probably because they're fearful of change. And, like, it's not just the Christian thing either. Like, a lot of Muslims that you can see on my social media, like, they're not too happy with some of the stuff that I post either, because it's challenging, I guess, my universalist approach to the Islamic faith. Like, I do see it as there for humanity. It's a universal faith. It provides salvation for all people, not simply Muslims. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, because it's like, well, if that's the case, well, why am I Muslim? And like, it just rocks people. So the hate comes honestly. Now,
what kind of affirmations are you getting from the academic world, the Muslim scholars? Oh, you might not be getting affirmation. What kind of responses?
I do. I mean, like, for instance,
you mentioned one female scholar. Was that Dr. Ingrid Mattson?
Yes.
Is that
Mattson? Like, people like.
Is that the visiting scholar that you had as a guest lecturer?
No.
Okay.
I'll tell you this,
that's the default hijabi scholar.
I'll tell you, like, one person that I've grown a bit closer to in the last year and a half is Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
Okay.
He's invited me out to Berkeley a couple times, and he caught wind of
your tweets.
My tweets, but also, like, years ago, I wrote a paper on. It was for the Huffington Post, actually, which, like, no longer really exists, but on the blog at least, and I was writing on how Muhammad wasn't merely a non-racist person, that he was an anti-racist person, that he actually, actively took measures to dismantle racism rather than just saying, I don't believe, I think racism is wrong. So he was being active, and Sheikh Hamza caught wind of that, and we spent some time together in Berkeley. Like, I did a video for his
at the Zaytuna Institute.
Yeah, at Zaytuna, and then we filmed we filmed like a 3-hour conversation, which was basically talking about everything under the sun. Like, I can't even remember where that conversation went. It hasn't showed up yet on YouTube. I think they're backlogged. But I mean, for someone like him to kind of recognize my work is big. But I think in traditional Islamic studies and academia, I'm a bit of an oddball because, again, I'm a sociologist. And like, a lot of sociologists don't necessarily explore the Islamic faith as I do. Like, there's no program, to my knowledge, in the United States that's called, like, the sociology of Islam. There's one professor, his name is Charles Kurzman at UNC, University of North Carolina. And if you look at his bio, he's like, my research interest is the sociology of Islam. But to my knowledge, he's like one of the only people in this realm.
And so what is your mentor, Akbar Ahmed? He's the chair of Islamic Studies at American University?
Yes.
What is he up to?
He's an anthropologist. And,
and a filmographer, right?
Yes, and a filmographer, yep. And he's a former diplomat, so he's a man of many hats. And
so he seems to have had the most profound impact upon you as it relates to your endeavors in Islamic studies.
Yeah, I mean, he got me off to the right start. You know? He was an anthropologist. It's quite close to sociology, but I had the privilege of going around this country with him in 2007 and 2008. We traveled for a year, and we went to over 100 mosques studying what it meant to be an American through the lens of Muslims. And that was a huge part of my training. It was basically a PhD before my PhD.
Okay, right. All the data.
Yeah. It was very, very extensive. And so I'm, in the academic realm, I'm a bit of, I'm tough to place. Like I'm not religion. I'm not necessarily sociology or Islamic studies. I'm a lot of. You're
a hybrid, as they say.
I'm a hybrid, yeah. Like I like it that way because I don't want to be boxed into a category. Like one thing I appreciate is when scholars do read my literature. My pieces of scholarship. They come from various backgrounds. Like even if you look on Google Scholar, all the different people that have cited my papers and my books. There's people from all different walks of life, like even media, politics, religion, even like mental health and psychology. So I want to keep it that way. I want to be able to communicate my ideas in a way that other people, regardless of what your academic discipline is or who you are as an individual, you're able to relate to it. I think it's really important for scholars to keep it simple and to write and create in a way that, your regular kind of Joe, I don't mean that in a condescending way, but, anyone can relate to it and anyone can see the purpose and value of it.
Craig, I want to thank you for such a wonderful, insightful interview. It's been a pleasure having you on. I know you were like, who is this guy? Are you stalking me? I know you didn't know what to make because out the blue, I was like, look, I want to interview on my show. And you're like, okay, we'll see.
It was a pleasure. Honestly, I think you had great questions, great insight. I think we covered a huge amount of territory, and I think we kept it constructive and positive. And,
right.
That's really important. And I'll say this, Qasim, if you're ever in Houston, we have to meet up.
Yes, I've been to Houston a couple times.
Good, yeah. Keep me posted, and I'd love to host you in my Muslims in American Society class, and maybe you can come and share some of your insight and interact with some
Great. Love to. Thank you again.
Thank you, Qasim.
All right, and have a good evening.